Hi, I'm Jenna Feasting.
I'm Sarah Humphrey,
I'm Morgan Webb, and we are with Carson Newman's ecology class.
and today we're going to be talking about invasive versus native species.
We're going to be discussing the differences between invasive versus native species. To start off, what is a species? A species is a group of plants, animals, insects, or other living things that look and act similarly to each other. So some fun examples of species that you may know are polar bears, or bumblebees, or even sugar maple trees. So a native species is a group of plants, animals, insects, or other living things that is naturally found in an environment. This is different from an invasive species, which is a species that is introduced to a new environment and can cause harm. Why are native species, such as plants, animals, and insects, important? Native plants can provide shelter and food for other wildlife around. So some examples that you may see in your own backyard are maple trees or oak trees or even dandelions. Native animals are important because they regulate other animal populations. They manage plant life by consuming plants. They can even provide food and manage other diseases. Some examples that you might see in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park or even at the Wildlife Observation Area in Jefferson City are black bears or white-tailed deer and snappy turtles. And finally, why native insects? They can provide nutrients to pollinate plants. They can disperse seeds to create new plants. They can also keep soils healthy and provide food for other animals. So some examples you might see around here are honeybees, swallowtail butterfly, and stink bugs. How are native or invasive species bad? Invasive species can disrupt natural communities and essential ecosystem functions. They do this by outcompeting the native species in an area for food and habitat. This can cause extinction of the native animals or plants or insects in an area and can even often introduce diseases. So here are some examples of invasive species in the United States. Our first one we're going to discuss is the Burmese python. These are found in Florida, but originally they came from Southeast Asia. They were introduced to the United States from illegal pet trade, and now the population has grown so much that tens of thousands are known to inhabit the Everglades National Park in Florida. These are harmful to small mammal populations, and in 2008, the Nature Conservancy in Florida launched the Python Patrol to start regulating these populations. Another example in the United States is a European starling. It is native to Europe, Asia, and Africa, and they were introduced to the United States by some Shakespeare enthusiasts in New York's Central Park. They released a couple of these birds, and now this bird is the most numerous in the United States. These are harmful because they compete with native bird species for nest sites, and they also introduce disease and destroy crops. Our final example we're going to look at in the United States is nutria or swamp rats. These are located now mainly in Louisiana, but were native to South America. They were introduced to the United States for fur trade, and while they are mainly found in Louisiana, they are also present in at least 20 other states. These are harmful to the environment because they destroy aquatic vegetation, crops, and wetland, which both harms the area and also prevents other native species from utilizing these things such as for food and housing. So the best way to control these populations has been found to exclude the swamp rats from their preferred environments.
Some invasive species that are close to home that you might even see in your neighborhood or even in your own backyard are kudzu, zebra mussels, and honeysuckle. Kudzu is native to Japan, and it outcompetes native plants, so they don't receive enough sunlight and they don't get enough nutrients for soils. Kudzu is also known as the vine that ate the South because it prefers the warmer temperatures of the southern United States, and it is also known as the 365 vine because on average kudzu can grow up to 1 foot a day. Zebra mussels harm other native mussels, and they can also filter out algae. Honeysuckles are native to Asia. They cut off water supply. And they cut off sap circulation in trees. The honeysuckle one actually. Some more invasive species are the longhorned Asian tick, the raccoon, and dandelions. The raccoon is native to Germany. It was brought over in the early 1930s, and they have grown to such a massive population in our state that they have actually become one of the Tennessee state animals. The dandelion is native to Europe, and it was brought over to the U.S. during the mid-1600s. People used to actually grow dandelions on farms because people thought it was actually medicine. Like they would dry it out and then put it in teas, and it was said to help the heart and to help several other things with. Here is a map of the world and some of our invasive species that we have mentioned, and by looking at this you can see just how far each species had to travel to get to the United States and to really take root. As you've probably noticed by now, most invasive species are small. Well, smaller species, they're easier to transport, it's a lot easier to not get caught, and some of them even happen accidentally. And unless you really know your native plants and animals, it's hard to walk outside and just say, this doesn't belong here. Like, that tree right there should not be here. It's a very hard thing to do. And many stay at low levels of population before they just rapidly take over, and that's often when you truly. Some smaller invasive plants. Plants are a lot easier to get over the ocean than animals, and like animals, they do stay at small levels before they explode in population. And once plants are planted and they take root, it's very hard for them to be gotten rid of, because while you can dig up the plant, there's a good chance that the seeds have already been dispersed and they have been carried around. In our top picture here, you see a cargo ship. That is how a lot of goods get transported between countries. And when you think about it, it would actually be very easy for one little small seed to get on this huge cargo ship. And once it is brought over and it's unloaded, all it has to do is find some soil, and it's here. So it's like they just get a free ride.
So like Morgan said, a lot of invasive species are going to be a lot smaller, so they're harder to see, or they're going to be plants, so you don't really see them until they're already rooted and growing. But there's one larger invasive species that many of you may know really, really well, and they're very successful. You might snuggle with them in your bed or at your house. You might see them around in your backyard or just anywhere else, and that's the domestic house cat. So they were native to Europe, and they were brought over by European settlers. This was in the early 1600s when people were coming over from Europe to North America. And they're invasive, and they're very successful, so they do harm the natural environment by harming natural wildlife. And this looks like maybe they're harming birds. If any of you have ever seen a cat with a bird in its mouth or with a mouse in its mouth, they can also introduce diseases to other animals in the nature scene. But don't worry, there are some things we can do to help. So the first thing we can do is we can plant native plants like wildflowers to help with pollinators. So this will attract pollinators, really important pollinators like bees, to come into the area and help keep it very successful for native wildlife. And then this is also going to take up more space so that invasive species can't grow here. Another thing you can do is you can clean gear before and after going to a new area. So if you like to go hiking and you have your really cool hiking boots, make sure you clean them before you go on a new trip and after you've come back from another trip. So if you're going to go hiking out in maybe North Carolina area in the mountains, and then you're going to go all the way over to California to the Rocky Mountains, make sure you clean your boots before you do that, because like we said earlier, seeds can latch onto clothes really easily. You can also do this, make sure you clean your boats or kayaks before you go into a new waters. So like we said with the zebra mussels, they were able to latch on pretty easily and they were transported really fast. So make sure you're cleaning your boats before you put them in new water. And this includes, and then any other recreational gear you can think of, just make sure you clean it before and after you go to a new area. Another thing you can do is help out with removal efforts in public areas or in your own yard. So if you were inspired by our presentation and you want to go learn a lot more about invasive species and you notice in your yard that there's a plant that looks invasive and you've done your research, you can actually take it out yourself, but you might need help with your parents to figure out what to do with it after you removed it. Some other things we can do to help: we can make sure we're not moving our firewood from really far places. So if we have the woods behind our house and we go cut down firewood, that's okay to bring it back to your house, but let's try not to pull from places that are really far away. Another thing we can do, like we said, the cats are invasive species, but this doesn't mean we have to get rid of our cats. We just need to take care of them better so we can take care of the nature around us better. So this involves vaccinating our cats, making sure they're going to their regular vet checkups, and then keeping them inside if possible. If you do have some outside cats, I have an outside cat. That's okay, just make sure they're getting their regular checkups and you're vaccinating them. One more thing we can do, we can visit places like the Wildlife Observation Area here in Jefferson City, and you can go there to observe and learn more about the native organisms so you can see what plants and animals are supposed to be there. And then the last thing you can do, which is probably the most important thing to do, is to tell others about what you've learned. So you've learned a lot of really cool things about invasive species today. You can go home and tell your parents and dazzle them with all your new knowledge. And that's the most important thing, because you didn't know about invasive species before we told you about them. And now you have all these things you can do to help the nature around you. And all you had to do was learn. So, if you have any questions, you can let your teacher know and she can contact us or she can answer them herself. But thank you for listening. We love talking to you guys about invasive and native species. Bye!